The following program is a presentation of the Civil War Broadcasting Network, available on the free YouTube channel Dr. E.C. Fields and on various other social media. Permission to copy and distribute is given. Remember, you are the future of our past. I'm Captain Ulysses S. Grant, and today I should like to reflect with you about my career as a Missouri farmer, which unfortunately did not work out as I had planned and certainly hoped. I uncharacteristically had told my fellow officers at Fort Humboldt when I resigned and left Fort Humboldt, California, if you look me up in 10 years, you're going to see a successful old Missouri farmer. Unfortunately, that is not how it turned out. But let me talk about leaving the Army and tell you that I was in, I think, very good company. Comp Sherman had resigned in 1853 to go into banking in California. Rosecrans had resigned in 54 to become a civil engineer. Braxton Bragg, who'd been brevetted for bravery 3 times in the Mexican War, had resigned and gone to work his plantation in Mississippi. Henry Halleck, Old Brains, had resigned from the Army in 54 to become a mining consultant, and he became a very successful lawyer in California. And McClellan, George McClellan, the boy wonder, had resigned and gone to work with the Illinois Central Railroad and ultimately became its president. So I may come across all of these men in the future, but I was in, as I said, good company in resigning and leaving the service. When I got back to Whitehaven, I was farming land that Julia's father, Colonel Dent, had given her. Now, I was living with Julia and our 2 children there in Whitehaven with Colonel Dent and his wife, Mrs. Dent, and the children, Ellen, who's still there, and their youngest, and began during the winter of 55, fall and winter 54, 55, began clearing timber on the land that Colonel Dent had given Julia as a wedding gift. Of note to me was that he did not give her a deed. He gave her the land as a wedding gift, but didn't give her a deed. He was concerned that I would fall on hard times, which he repeatedly reminded me I demonstrated where I would be in hard times, and was concerned that I would sell the property. So nevertheless, we lived there with them the fall and winter of 54, 55, and I began clearing land at the land that Julia had been given. The land was, much of it was too hilly to be arable. It wasn't good land to farm. The land that was good land to farm was heavily timbered with oak and other forestry, and I had to clear that first. Well, I began with the will to clearing it. I used the wood to good purpose because it was my intent to build our own home on the land, and trees rather, I didn't use for a building material to clean and scrape, put on blocks to cure for the year they needed a cure. I took to St. Louis and sold as cordwood at $4 the cord. I had no money, and the only way that I could generate money was to sell cordwood. So I began working as hard as I could, and we spent that winter there at Whitehaven with the Dents. In the spring of 55, we moved into the home of Julia's brother, Lewis, named Wishton Wish. All of the Dents named their homes some fancy name. And Wishton Wish was about a mile and a half from Whitehaven, which was not quite far enough, but it would do to get me out of the house from Colonel Dent. It was about a mile from the land that I was farming. Well, we moved there in the spring of 55 and were there. We'd just gotten comfortable in July of 55, July 4th, when our third child, Ellen, we call her Nellie, was born. And like her mother is Colonel Dent's favorite, she quickly became my favorite. Born on the 4th of July. I was busily clearing land, working it. I had gotten 2 horses from a friend, Charlie Ford, whom I had met at Sackett's Harbor in New York. Charlie was now living in St. Louis and was a clerk for the United Express Agency, and sold me a couple of their horses, Tom and Bill. And I was using them to move the timber I'd cut and to plow what I could when I could plow. And I was very happy with that. Those were happy moments for me. Working with Tom and Bill reminded me of working with Dave when I was a child. My horse, Dave, named after a local lawyer there in Georgetown who greatly resented my naming the horse after him. I bought the horse from him, so I named it after him. But I worked with Tom and Bill clearing timber, either curing it to build a home or hauling wood into St. Louis. But this, I should say, greatly worked against me because every moment that I was in St. Louis selling wood for the money I had to have was time I was not spending on my farm. And I couldn't be in 2 places at the same time. I had to have the money. I had to clear land and put land under the plow. And it seemed as if every 2 steps I took, I had to take 1 back. So it really caused me great angst. But that's how I spent the remainder of 55. Now I'm in Wishton Wish, and I've got my 3rd child. In 1856, I was putting in a crop. I had enough land by this time that I had a decent crop, and I was still cutting wood and hauling wood, but I started having health problems. I developed rheumatism. I was working so hard that I was wearing myself out. I was having my sick headaches, which would lay my measure in the bed. I had recurrences of ague and something, Tyler's grip, that nearly carried me off my last year at West Point, and I was in deathly fear that I was going to develop consumption, which has already carried off 2 of my uncles. And I was sick, and when I'm in bed, I can't work, and that's working another mental hardship on me. I've got the littlest one in the house, and I've got to get out of bed and provide for my family. I asked my father for a loan. He wouldn't give it to me, wouldn't respond to the entreaties for money. Colonel Dent had said that he would give me money and finance the buying of implements and seed. He was never forthcoming with much of that either. But I persevered. And by the fall of 56, I've had a good crop, but it was nondescript. I didn't make much money, and I'm still working, it seems, almost against myself. But 56 passed. I was able to move into Hardscrabble in the fall of 56, so that was a triumph. Hardscrabble is the only thing that I ever made. It was my own home. I was not under somebody else's roof, either parent or in-law, and I had my own home with my family. I was very happy with it. On the other hand, Julia was not. Julia abhorred it. She wanted to stay in Wishton Wish and couldn't figure out why in the world I would want to leave that to move into a log cabin. But nevertheless, we did. as we went into 57, early in 57, Julia's mother, Ellen Dent, died. She'd been sick all through December. So I began 1857 on a down note. Julia was heartbroken, her father was heartbroken, and I was heartbroken. Julia had lost her mother, Colonel Dent had lost his wife, and I had lost the only advocate I had in the Dent home. And that, other than just the pain of losing a good woman in the family, I'd lost my favorite, strongest advocate. So we moved back into Whitehaven after living in Hardscrabble for only about 3 months. Now, a happy note, I would like to say, is the evenings by the fire with my now 3 children, reading to Julia and the children. And a highlight of that was reading that new Charles Dickens book, Oliver Twist. Mr. Dickens has written a good one with Oliver Twist. And we were getting it in serial form in Bentley's Miscellany. I like Bentley's Miscellany. Look forward to getting it every issue. And the children and Julia look forward to me reading the latest chapter in the unfolding tale of Oliver Twist. And as I look back and think about this, a tale of my own was unfolding in those days. Well, I got a good crop in. 1857 was a good crop. 55, I hadn't done much at all. 56, nothing certainly for me to write home about, as the old expression goes. But 57 was looking good. I'm still struggling with health problems, malarial recurrences, ague, Tyler's grip, onset of rheumatism, loss of weight because I'm working every waking hour that I can. But I got a good crop in. Got a real good crop in. But something was nagging at me that Russian wheat has been introduced into our market. And I'm concerned that that's going to push down the price of the prairie wheat that I am raising, as are all or most St. Louis area Missouri farmers are raising. I'm still asking my father for a loan and not getting any money from him. Colonel Dent's not giving me any money. He's grieving about the loss of his wife, and I'm feeling pretty good about how my crops are looking. I've got a bumper crop coming up: melon, corn, beans, potatoes, prairie wheat. It's all looking really good. Weather's been good. I'm excited about getting, at last, taking 2 steps and being able to stay the 2 steps. Then came August of 1857, and we had a panic, and the country and the world was plunged into the worst economic depression we have ever seen. And as a result of the panic, that bumper crop that I'm so ecstatic about, I couldn't give it away. Nobody could sell their crops for anything. So the bottom economically has fallen out. So yet another disappointment has visited me. This time I've got a good crop and I can't sell it. Economic depression. Everybody is in financial misery. I even walked into Comp Sherman one day in St. Louis when I was in town selling wood, and he and I talked a bit, reminisced about the academy, and commiserated about our individual and collective financial problems. You see, Comp was in St. Louis to close the last branch of the bank that he'd left the Army to join. And he closed the 3 branches in California. He'd been to New York, closed the branches there, and was indeed in St. Louis to close out the last branch of the bank. And then he would be unemployed. And he lamented to me angrily, you know, Grant, it would seem that West Point and the Army were not good teachers for bankers and farmers. And I agreed with him, and we went our separate ways. I hope to see him again in the future. So we go into the fall of 57. Harvest is what should have been a thrill for me was a disappointment. And by Christmas of 1857, I went one day while in town selling wood. I went to the pawn shop of J.S. Freely, December 23rd of 57, and I hocked my gold watch with the detached lever and gold chain. And I got $22 for it. It was the only money I had and all I could get and the only way to get it. I was broke. But I've got 3 little children and another on the way. My children had to have a Christmas, and I had to get something for them to open and celebrate. Julia is almost full term with our 4th child, and she is uncomfortable and unhappy. And I had to give something to her for Christmas that would put a smile on that sweet face. So I hocked my watch, and we went into 1858. Our last child, Jesse, was born on February the 6th of 1858, and I now have 4 children. And I've got 3 years of a wreckage of attempted farming behind me, but I put in another crop. I'm game. I never thought but that I would be a successful Missouri farmer. So I asked my father for money yet again. No money forthcoming. Colonel Dent had moved back to or into his townhome in St. Louis, and we are renting Whitehaven from him. Now I've got 200 acres to put to plow, and I've got 250 or so acres for pasture. And once again, I'm on a crest of enthusiasm because I'm thinking now I've got enough land I can put out a crop that will sustain my family and make a cash crop for me. I've at last reached a point where I can farm and make something of it. And I did everything I could. And we have the coldest spring anyone in the St. Louis area can remember. And then it killed almost everything that had sprouted, began to grow. And then on June 5th, the final hammer blow. June the 5th of 1858, the St. Louis area had the coldest day on record, the coldest frost on record. And what hadn't already been killed was dead. In the home, I'm sick with a respiratory illness, Tyler's grip, the ague. Julia is sick. All 4 of the children are sick. Fred caught typhoid, and he was so deathly ill that Julia and I, held our breath every morning as we checked on him because we were sore afraid that he would be dead. But he managed to pull through, only by the hardest. His little constitution fought. The boy wanted to live, and he did. But a common side effect of typhoid fever is deafness, and Fred was stone deaf. Now we're afraid he'll be deaf permanently because sometimes that deafness is permanent. But ultimately, he got his hearing back. And Julia was able to get up and around. I'm still abed. I was in bed almost a whole year. I can't move. And when I did get up, it was agony to move and get my joints working, rheumatism, all the other ailments that had beset me. And I'm fighting the depression. So come fall of 1858, I'm broke still again. And I decided, Julia and I talked, and I decided to auction off my equipment and what I had in the farm and get a job working out of farming. My father came visiting, and offered me a job in the family business in Covington, Kentucky, across the river from Cincinnati. And I accepted and was making preparations to move to Covington, Kentucky. Well, Julia did not want to move to Covington, Kentucky because she said, nobody in that family likes me except your mother. And we came to find out afterward, not even my mother by that time liked her. My mother thought she was a spendthrift. And of course, neither mother nor father cared for her being in a slave owning family. So she talked with her father in earnest, and her father did not want us to move because he didn't want to give up his favorite daughter nor 4 grandchildren whom he felt if they moved to Kentucky, he'd never see them again. And he might well have been right about that. So he began seeking employment for me, unbeknownst to me. I'm walking the streets in St. Louis looking for work, and I cannot find work. The effects of the Depression are still very real and evident. But he talked with Julia's cousin Harry Boggs, who had a real estate agency, and agreed, even though I brought no money into the effort, nothing to invest, but a willing heart and hard work to offer. And I knew nothing about real estate, collecting rent, selling it, or maintaining it in any way. He secured for me a job with Harry Boggs. And Boggs Real Estate in early 1859 became Boggs and Grant. And I closed the chapter in early 1859 on my efforts to become a successful old Missouri farmer. I had not become that. And I resolved to put it behind me and move on. And that would be the, I think, sad tale of my life as a farmer in Missouri. Until next time, I bid you adieu.